Okay, now that I have the parts colored and the dye has dried, look at that. I like the way that's coming out there. Hope y'all can see that pattern coming out on that. It's really nice. I still can buff the excess dye off and just get a bit of a shine. Anyway, what I was getting at is before I put these together, before it's assembled, I need to top coat them, because once it's assembled, it's very difficult to get down inside to get the top coat in there. And I want to get it on both sides. So, for that, I'm going to use my tan coat. That's basically what I use on everything. Like, let me just show you my belt here. Like my belt, and this has been lasting, jeez, probably over a decade now. I've been thinking about trying other stuff, but I don't see a reason to. Anyway, I take my tan coat and I put it in my clamp here, because, you know, makes it so I can't knock it over. That makes a heck of a mess. Let's see, let me get this thing right about there. To apply it, nothing complicated. I just use a dauber. Start on the back side first and just put it on. Kind of like the same way I did the dye. I don't really need to saturate it as much. It's going to soak in and leave a protective layer, a protective coating over the leather. But I'm going to go ahead and take care of the back side of these things. I'm going to do both of them. Don't worry that it bubbles up like that. Those bubbles will go away as it dries. What you could do is just take a paper towel and wipe off the excess. Not necessarily on the inside, because it does absorb into the leather. Anyway, like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and do both pieces, and we'll be back. All right, I've given the back side a few minutes to dry. It doesn't take long. But then I'm going to go ahead and do the front side. But first, I need to get my paper towel ready. Because what we're going to do is just slop some on and then wipe it off with a paper towel. Clean one. I like to fold them in quarters like this. It works for me. And same thing, just spread the stuff on. You do not have to be neat, just make sure to get it on there. You do it half at a time, then just wipe off the excess. Flip it around. Do the same thing to the other side. And just wipe off the excess. Now I got that piece of glass I talked about when I was doing the when I was dyeing the leather, and I just set it on there to dry, just like I did when I was dyeing the leather. Do the same thing with this one. Just slop it on there. I'm gonna go ahead and do the whole thing on this one. Yeah, this is where neatness doesn't count. In fact, the faster you slop it on, the better. You don't want to let it sit too long, because when it starts drying, it gets a little bit tacky, and that makes it more difficult to wipe off the excess. That's good right there. Get that little piece of paper towel off. Then go ahead and do these. The other side. and set it on the glass to dry. Now by now, this one should be, that's too dirty. It should be ready for buffing. When this stuff dries, it goes through stages. It starts out wet, obviously. Then it gets a little bit tacky, but as it dries more, it loses the tack, but it still stays kind of soft. And at that point, you can buff it. And that brings out a little bit of a shine. So you get a finish like that, which is basically the kind of finish that I go for. Now by now this one should be dry enough to buff. Ah, guess I'm on a finger. There we go. Now the scratched up area, that's going to be the center stitch line. And after this dries, I'm going to go through and scratch it up again with my, well, scratch all before gluing it. I'm going to do the same to the back side of this, just kind of, you know, break the finish. I'm going to go ahead and put some on the edges. I am going to leave these edges square. I'm not going to burnish them or anything like that. Actually, square edges is an acceptable edge finish. Square, unburnished edges. You don't have to do something because somebody says that they do it. Like, if you're doing a stitch line, it's not always necessary to groove it. In fact, I rarely groove stitch lines. I see no reason for it. Back in the day when they used linen thread, maybe, yeah, to help protect the thread, but with the polyurethane threads I use, it don't make a difference. Oh, got some cotton on there. Or polypropylene, whatever that stuff is. Anyway, this one just needs to sit and dry. I'll do the edges on this one. And then it just sits and dries. And after that, we'll start assembling this thing. See you then. Okay, we've given that top coat some time to dry, and now it's time to glue this piece to this piece. Just right on top of it. Now, what I'm going to do is when I stitch this together, this way though, I'm going to start out with this stitch line, which goes right down here. But what I'll need to do is line them up. So I already punched the stitch holes in here. And I'm going to take a stitching needle, stick it through there, and stick it through there. That is after I apply the glue. And I have a hole there and a hole there. Then I can align these using those two needles. And from there I can just push it together. And that'll line up this line where I need it to be. So when it comes to stitching, it'll be well centered. So anyway, let's get to it. That's the hard part, getting these back out. Now I don't want to lose these because we have cats and they'll probably turn into a cat toy and end up in the bottom of our foot somewhere. I doubt the cat's stupid enough to eat something like that. I'm going to use Tanner's Bond contact cement, which is pretty much what I use for most anything that's leather. What it does, it's not to hold the leather together, but it bonds it together long enough or well enough for me to work it, to put that stitch line in, to punch the stitch holes and to stitch it, which makes it a lot more convenient than trying to chase the leather around and stitch it at the same time. So just a little bit down the middle. I don't know how well you can see this, but just take the brush and I'm just going to apply a little bit of the cement down the middle. Doesn't have to be great gobs of it. Just a nice layer. And you kind of want to be neat, but it's not all that easy or possible for me. I'm going to do the same thing with this piece. There we go. Just a little bit of glue right down that line. Give that about 10 minutes or so to turn tacky, because it'll go from being, you know, gloppy wet to being kind of gooey to being almost dry, but just a little bit tacky. That'll take about 5 minutes or so. And once that's set up, well, gone tacky, then we'll take it, we'll stick the two of them together. All right, that's been about long enough. I put the, oopsie. Well, let me try that again. That's been about long enough. I've got my needles in, and I'm just going to put them in the holes that I punched in the back piece and just push it together. Don't need to clamp it or anything, just got to mash it down real good. If I was folding this over, or if there was any kind of stress being put on the leather, like, let's see, like this. If I was folding it over like that, then yeah, I would clamp that seam, because it'll want to pull itself back apart. But just a flat piece to a flat piece, I just mash it down. It'll be fine. Just squish it together real good. Now I'm going to leave the needles in it. I'll probably take them out, leave them in, either way. And I'll just let it sit for a while. Come back through with my punch those holes through all the way, and then go ahead and stitch that. Well, it's that time to do some stitching. I've got the belt loops riveted on. I decided to go ahead and rivet it. And I've already stitched down the middle and down one side. Now I'm going to stitch on this side. And the thing is, stitching this is a lot like stitching bullet loops. Let's see if I can find some. I know I got some. There we go. Like stitching bullet loops, except this is 4 to 5 ounce leather, and this is 7 to 8 ounce leather, so it's a lot less flexible, but still very much doable. Go ahead and clamp it in my, well, clamp. Oops. I'll be all clumsy while I'm doing it. There we go. Just squeeze that down some. And that should be plenty to hold it. Okay. Gonna get my thread ready. I'll be right back. All right. I got my needles locked on. Both sides. And I'm going to start my stitch line where I consider it to have the most stress, which would be where you would insert the tool. Like with the holster, I started at the top where you would insert the gun, because that gets, as far as I'm concerned, that gets the most stress. Which means I'm going to start way down at this end. Now since I punched these stitch holes, they have closed up a bit, so I'm gonna waller my needle around a little to get it through. It's kind of a pain to stitch this way, but like I said, it's doable. Oops. Make sure I get my threads oriented correctly. And I'm just going to go through this hole and aim for the next hole. Wiggle it around a little bit. Wiggle, wiggle. And I'm not talking about what my wife likes doing.
Cats like it too.
Yeah, that's true.
Aww.
Take my second needle and put that under my first stitch. But as you can tell, I got everything kind of opened up here. Now, this is critical to make sure you didn't pierce the thread. I'll just take and I'll pull the thread back and forth just to make sure I didn't pierce it. Pull that one snug. Take this one, pull it snug, and make sure that your two needles are aligned. And in my case, they're not. And that's fine. I can just pull on this one a little bit. There we go. That was too much, but you get the idea. You just pull it back and forth until the needles line up. Now usually I say you don't have to strangle it, but on this one, I kind of strangle it a little bit to pull that thread tight. Put the next one in. And pretty much do the same kind of thing. Yeah, it's a bit more of a pain to stitch a stitch line this way than if you have it all glued and stuff. But if you're patient, it'll go along just fine. Now I'm going to keep on stitching and we'll be back. And the thing is, when you get toward the end of the line, it actually gets a little bit easier. I still got to waller out the holes. Because, you know, I punch them beforehand. And then after they get all dyed and stuff, they tend to close up a bit. But I just take the needle, waller them out some. That one goes in there. That one comes through here. Give that a little tug to make sure I didn't pierce the thread. And then pull them snug. And like I said, usually I say just snug the threads. But on something like this, you want to really pull them tight, because you don't want that seam pulling apart. Ball that hole out a little bit. Put that through. Make sure I'm using the right needle. That's the thing, my gimpy old hands get fatigued by the time I get to the end of a stitch line. But my neurologist says it's good therapy, so I keep doing it. And this one doesn't want to cooperate. Of course, because I've got the camera on. There we go. That's the way it works. Everything's going fine till I turn the camera on. Okay, see, that time I did pierce the thread. But by checking beforehand, I've got time to correct that. Alright. Now we'll go ahead and do our back thread. Or back stitch rather. And basically the same thing. Except you just stitch back the other way. Give it a tug, didn't pierce it. Sometimes I gotta use these. And they do have smooth jaws, so they don't scar up the needles. Don't want scarred needles. Nope, didn't pierce it. That's a snug one there. I'll do a couple more, and then we'll end our stitch line there. Oopsie. I was about to say, that's how it works when it works right. And then, of course, I dropped the needle. That's okay. That's the thing about leather. When you punch a stitch hole, it'll be an open stitch hole, but it'll close up on itself. See some people drilling stitch holes, and that kind of makes me cringe, because that takes away that characteristic. They're removing material. Anyway, that's it for that stitch line. I'll just cut it off. Leave it about that much. Hope you can see that. Just take a regular old lighter and melt the ends. And that's stitched on then. And it is going to sit like this. This will fit in this side. And that'll fit in that side. But first, I got to wet mold them. Alright, and it's done. I took and I wet it down real good to do some molding on it. You can see how these fit in. This one just slides right in there. Boop. This one slides in right there. Now, it holds them well enough that they won't accidentally go flying out. But still, they're easy to get to. Easy and quick. And got the belt loops on the back. I did rivet those. I don't know if I mentioned that already or not. But that's designed to fit an 1.5-inch belt. And that's it. Now it's on to the next project.